Hello, fellow fans of superhero tabletop role-playing game. My name is Aldo Regalado, aka Dragonfly, or TGI Dragonfly in some corners of our community, and I'm doing this promo video to give folks a better sense of what my book, The Superverse, is all about. Now, the way I see it, The Superverse is a campaign source book that brings Bronze Age sensibilities to contemporary superhero gaming. And that's really kind of unavoidable. I grew up reading Bronze Age comics. I love that stuff. I love other stuff as well. But those sensibilities, those comics are always foundational, and those sensibilities always come through no matter what it is that I'm working on. Also, my first primary artist for the project, Joe Singleton, was also a huge fan of the Bronze Age, and his art just bursts with that kind of energy. Even though it was a very relevant to the modern audience, it still had that kind of classic sensibility that shined through all of his work. So actually, this book is not just a book, it's 5 books. I'm supporting 5 different games. So there are 5 different books. All of them are the Superverse. And the games that I'm supporting are Super's Revised Edition, Icons, Bash, Super Game 3rd Edition, and Hero System 6th Edition, or Champions 6th Edition if you prefer. Um, Regardless of what version of the Superverse you have, however, all of the editions of the Superverse contain the following resources for you to use in your superhero gaming. First of all, there are over 100 pieces of full color interior art in this book. Um, I had 5 artists working on this. I already mentioned the late great Joe Singleton. In addition to Joe, the other primary artist for the project was Ade Smith, who did tremendous work as well. Dan Hauser came in and did some wonderful pieces for us as well. A new artist by the name of the Timmy, which I met on Fiverr, also did some great work for us. My daughters did a few pieces. I'm really proud to have them involved in this as well. And then finally, I need to mention Russ Boyd, who was co-writer with me on Super's Revised Edition way back in the day. And right around that time, he helped me produce a couple of character books wherein he created the original character designs for many of the characters that appear in this book. And some of his art from those projects appears in this book as well. So all of those artists working on this, I am very privileged and very honored to have worked with all of them. They were all inspirational to me. But yes, that results in over 100 pieces of full color interior art in this book. Here you see a couple of those pieces, but you're going to see a lot more of those as we move through the various different elements of this book. Now, speaking of elements, one of the things we need to talk about is characters, right? Characters, characters, characters. It's always a big part of any sort of source book for a role-playing game. And this book has 40 named characters that fall into various different categories, which I'll go through in a second. There are also another 23 different stat blocks in the book that are for unnamed characters, right? Those are your chimera agents or your unicorn agents or your armor agents or your security robots or your security drones or your, other kind of minion type or supporting cast type characters, police officers, things like that. So we have 23 other stat blocks for those folks, but there are 40 named characters in this book. All named characters have art associated with them. They all have a brief description, and sometimes they have more. Now, these characters fall into different categories. One is NPC superheroes. You see the Freedom Ring is one of the primary superhero teams that appear in this book. Also, along the side here in the buttons, you have some of the members of the round table. It's actually a group of pre-gen heroes that can be used as pre-gens to run through the adventures in this book, or can be used as NPC heroes as well. One thing I want to say about NPC heroes is that I personally don't like it when I pick up a source book for a superhero game and all of the major superhero groups are already kind of laid out in that book, because then I feel like that they're breathing air that my player characters should be breathing. So although the characters in this book, these heroes, these NPC heroes are important, and some of them have very long histories, I've written them so that they are not the primary premier team in the world at this point in time. Some of them are retired or semi-retired or having a hard time controlling their powers or trying to do the right thing but doing it in ways that are not good and therefore on the other side of the law. And so really these are characters that flesh out the universe that the player characters can interact with, can have camaraderie with, can fight with, can try to convince to change their ways, can help out at tight situations. These are meant to be support for the heroes that are your player characters, which really should be the central characters in the game. In addition to NPC superheroes, there are also supporting characters. I'm a big believer that the Aunt Mays and the Alicia Masters and the Commissioner Gordons and the Lois Lanes of the comic book world are as important, or at least really, really important, to helping tell the stories that appear in some of those favorite books. And so I've made an effort to include that type of character in the Superverse. Again, all supporting characters get color art. They get at least brief descriptions of their backgrounds and their motivations and whatnot. And I try to make them, give the GM a handhold to try to fully realize them as characters in the setting. But of course, there are also plenty of supervillains. Yes, villainy abounds in the Superverse, and you see some of the primary villains here in the Iron Gauntlet. And then there are others beyond them. You have some members of the Calivici crime family, or the Hell Squad from the Calivici crime family, right here on the side. You have Malifon, who is my version of kind of like Thanos, my answer to Thanos, or Darkseid, up there at the top of the button of the row of buttons there. But yeah, supervillains are very important in this setting as well, of course. So there you have it. One of the things I'd like to say, one more thing I'd like to say about characters before we move on from them, is that in addition to working on the, trying to provide art for them and to provide descriptions, I've also tried to make the stat blocks appealing, right, aesthetically appealing and easy to use, right? And so what I'd like to do next is just go through a stat block, different character, but for each of the different systems that I'm supporting, so that if you're thinking of picking up one of these books, you have a sense of whether or not you like the way that I've kind of like set this up, right? I know that as a game master or as a player, looking at a character sheet tells me a lot about a supplement or about a game, right? So here we go. This is Iron Maiden, one of the primary villains, a member or a future member of the Iron Gauntlet, sporting a Super's Revised Edition character sheet. So that's what that looks like. Here we have Min-Max, who is a superhero and probably a member of the Freedom Ring, sporting an Icons character sheet. Modeling the Bash character sheet is the Sire, who is the founding member of the Iron Gauntlet, or will be at the end of the adventure series. And he is, like I said, he's sporting the Bash Ultimate Edition character sheet here. Here we have Malifon, the Thanos-like villain, or the Darkseid kind of cosmic villain, on a super game 3rd edition character sheet. And then one of my favorite characters in the book, Freedom Star, on a Champion 6th edition or Hero 6th edition character sheet. And the Champions character sheet being a little bit more involved than the others, all of the Champions characters end up on these 2-page spreads. I think there's only one character that bled over into a 3rd page, maybe 2. But for the most part, especially if you purchase the POD, right, the print-on-demand version, which will be available in about 6 to 8 weeks, I've made sure that, when you open the book, you get the 2-page spreads for all of the character write-ups and stat blocks. All right, so now that we're done with characters, I want to move on to talk about the next big topic, which is adventures. This book has 4 adventures, and those adventures are designed to take your heroes from kind of city protector level heroes, right? It's kind of like the default that I imagine, right? That your group will make kind of a group of independent heroes that are really kind of protecting the city from supervillainy and whatnot. It's designed to, by the end of the 4-module arc, it's designed to get you to a point where those same characters are now defending the planet from a cosmic threat, right? And it's 4 adventures, but each adventure has multiple acts. Me doing the math the other day and counting like how many issues that would be, I think it probably would amount to about 12 issues. In other words, maybe that's 12 sessions, but I could see that unfolding over the course of a year in the life of a comic book. One of the things that I do recommend is that game masters insert their own adventures in between the ones I've provided if they want to run these adventures, that they mix it up with their own. And so maybe that's actually 18 issues worth of comics, or 24 issues worth of comics, or sessions of gaming, whatever that is. But really, I've designed them to make that arc so the players go from being those city protectors to being defenders of the planet. And so that concluding battle should really kind of change the way that the heroes are perceived by the rest of the world. Another thing I'd like to say about the adventures that I've written here is that they're designed to reveal the Superverse to the player characters in a staged, sort of a scaffolded way, a staged way, so that they can get to know it little by little in ways that make sense, rather than have to kind of digest the whole thing at once. So in that way, it really is kind of a series of teaching modules that reveal things to the players in a kind of an organic way. And then I also want to say that I tend to write situation-based adventures, right? I don't write, it's not a linear progression from this encounter to that encounter to the other encounter. What happens is that I usually open up with kind of a big event. And then at the conclusion of that event, probably the heroes have a series of clues. And then I give you a timeline of things that the villains are going to do to fulfill to complete their plot, and then let the heroes loose on that timeline to see how they interfere with it, and how there are multiple ways that they can do that, right? So it's not the adventures I've written don't have very predictable ends. I suggest ways that it can go, and I try to prepare you to handle those different avenues that the villains and the heroes might take. But really, it's been, every time I've run these adventures, especially the first one, it's been very unpredictable, a different finish every single time, and it's been a great deal of fun. In addition to the adventure series, one of the next thing that I want to talk about is the timeline of events that I provide in the book, right? And this is a timeline that relates all of the lore that feeds into the book's various adventures, right? And this lore extends all the way from the Big Bang, from the universe's Big Bang, through the Earth's prehistoric period. And here you have Skana and Thunderbird, two of the characters in the book before they were kind of, in avatars and human avatars, right? So this is them in kind of their kaiju form. It touches on various historical events, including the American Civil War. Freedom Star's origins are tied to the Civil War era. Here you see his grandparents fighting for freedom in the context of the American Civil War. Of course, every good comic book universe has to have some World War II lore. So here you have Freedom Star fighting the Great Ghoul on the battlefields of World War II. Goes through the Cold War period, and brings us to the present day, right? So I'm really grateful that we were able to have the timeline illustrated in the way that we did. I love the art that was done there. All of that was that was all by Joe, by the Timmy, and by Aid. So, in the timeline, one of the things I want to say about that timeline of events is that it's all built from information that appears first in the character write-ups, and then I just went into those write-ups and I pulled out all of the historical information that I developed for that, and then I arranged it into this master timeline that I think is pretty easy to reference, right? So so there's that as a resource. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is the city of Del Rey, where all of the book's adventures are set, right? And the city of Del Rey is kind of a fictionalized version of San Francisco. And I've tried to make it a really robust setting for the play. So the section on Del Rey includes the following: a city map, which you see here, um, the city's history. So there's a brief history of the city. That's probably about 2 pages long. District and neighborhood descriptions, right? So if you look at the map here, you'll see that Old Town, Parkland, Midtown, Newtown, those are all districts. And within those districts, you have individual neighborhoods, right? So Old Town, for instance, has a bunch of them: Veneto Beach, Tomorrow District, Devil's Den, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So the way that I lay this out, and it's all bullet pointed, so it's very easy to access, is that you'll get the header for the district, then you'll get a little paragraph description of the district, then you get a label for a subheading for a neighborhood, and then in that neighborhood description you get like some qualities, which are just like some little descriptive terms that allow the GM to very quickly give a sense of what that neighborhood feels like. It has a little space for the types of people that you might encounter if you're there, a little bit on notable places that both general and specific that can be found in that neighborhood, an entry for the socioeconomic level of the people who live in that neighborhood, and then like a little paragraph description of that neighborhood. I think that all of those descriptions really make the neighborhoods in the city feel alive and real to players as they're kind of engaging it. And then finally, there are write-ups of important people and institutions in the city. This is everything from law enforcement to newspapers and hospitals. A lot of those supporting characters that I mentioned earlier appear in this section. You also have like major technology concerns detailed here. So one of them is Stellar Labs, which is a research and development facility that focuses on on space exploration and space sciences. You have Stanton Universal Technologies, or SUTEC, which is another research and development corporation that is important to this to the adventures in the book. And that's one thing that I want to say. There is a lot of descriptive stuff here. There's about 40 pages, right, of descriptions of these people and these institutions. But 90% of what appears in this section plays out in the published adventures, right? Like I created very little that wasn't actually going to appear in the adventures. And the reason for that is that sometimes I find it overwhelming when I pick up a book and everything in the world is already seems to already be kind of defined, right? So I prefer to give you the things that are actually going to be usable and playable in the immediate adventures that I'm giving you, and everything else I'd rather leave kind of open for you to create and define and design however you want, right? So that's been my approach to creating that part of the book. And anyway, I think that all of this creates a very robust playground for any group of player characters to engage with. And so I'm hoping that that will be of use and of interest to you. So that's about it in terms of the stuff that is actually in the book. I'll just end by mentioning two more little sections. There's a brief section on campaigning in the book. I'm always hesitant to write that because it sounds like I'm saying this is the right way to GM or to run a campaign. I'm not trying to say that at all. I'm just trying to provide, in that section, I'm trying to provide some guidelines that I made for myself so that I can kind of roll out the Superverse materials, but in a way that doesn't get in the way of player creativity, right? So it's kind of like a suggestion of an approach that you can use to give the players creative freedom to create what they're going to create, and then kind of fit the Superverse around them. So there are about 4 pages on that. And then the only other thing that I should mention is that the Super's revised edition version of the book has a section in the back with some optional rules. And I felt comfortable writing those because I was a co-author on Super's revised edition. So, you know, I figured like, yeah, I can do some optional rules for that. I didn't do that for any of the other systems because, one, I didn't feel the need to, and two, it's not really my, you know, I just didn't feel it was my place to be doing that. But again, I didn't really need to anyway. There was just some things that I wanted to introduce to Super's revised, so I did. Well, that's it. That concludes this walkthrough through the Superverse. I hope that was informative and useful. If you like what you see, please consider supporting it, right? If this is a successful project and people like what I'm doing, I will create more of it. So anyway, whatever the case, I appreciate your time and attention if you made it this far into the video. And I wish you all very, very happy gaming. All right. Have a good one. Thank you so much. Goodbye.